So here we are again, another great walking adventure, and another great pedestrian adventure. Tell you here, one of the things we're going to be talking today about is faith, hope, and love. We know the scripture points out the value of faith, hope, and love as being great. Those things that remain after many other things fall away, as it were. And the greatest being love. Now, when we look at it, there's a lot of people that talk about love, and they say that love is very important, and a lot of people will really promote love. But then when there's a time needed to actually love or be loved, they are not around. And it's not just that they're not around, but you find that maybe all they had to say was just something warm and fuzzy. And sometimes that's how things can go. I mean, I'm not giving you any particular examples here. I'm just saying in general, that's what we can find ourselves in. So we find ourselves in a situation where very easily, we listen to the preaching about faith, hope, and love, and we find that there is no faith, hope, and love. That it was some warm and fuzzy things, maybe even put there for our entertainment. And this is sad. It's very sad. One of the things we see with love there is we don't see boasting in love. We don't see a record of wrongs. We don't see a lot of things. It's not easily angered or offended. That love is kind. You don't see any vengefulness in love. And the situation here is that we look at these things, and one of the things that one of the conclusions that we can find here when we look at these things is that love is something that you don't normally find in the world. I mean, you can go into the world and you can find people that are suing each other. You can go into the world and you can find people that are mistreating each other, people that are abusing each other. You can go into the world and you can find power struggles. You can go into the world and you can find all kinds of situations that are not right. That tends to be how things go. That's one of the reasons why there are so many laws a lot of times, is because there are so many problems that the laws are designed to address. And it's because people don't have love a lot of times. And that's sad to say, But I will tell you this, sometimes we get into situations where, we have people or situations in our life that they just try to steal our joy and maybe manipulate us and do us a lot of harm and cause us problems to the extent where it's hard for us to maybe go to church or it's hard for us to do what's right. And in those situations, that's where we need to get rid of those things in our life if we can. We can't have a lot of that stuff. And it's not that we're not loving per se. It's that some things can really work against us. And believe it or not, when you get into a situation where you're in a bad situation for many decades, let's say, and maybe it's at your job, or maybe it's with neighbors or something. If they're always speaking slander against you and stuff like that, people are believing it. Maybe it's at school. Maybe you entered school when you were in kindergarten and you're with the same people in high school, and it's a small community and everybody knows each other, and you're in a situation where there's just a few people, and those people are just constantly making up stories about you and everything else, maybe, or they're doing all kinds of bad stuff that really can affect your life negatively in the long run. And it, and sometimes it's best, if you can, to get out of the situation. Because you get in those situations, sometimes what people do is they do homeschool. It might not be ideal, but it depends on how bad the problems are. Ideally, we would want to be loving and do everything we can, bend over backwards, so to speak, to if somebody comes up to us, tells us to walk a mile, to walk two, to turn the other cheek, to do all those things. And if we've done all those things and we're just constantly being used as a punching bag for people to release their frustrations, and it's to the extent that when we look at our long-term future, we're concerned that that if it keeps on going like that over the course of a lifetime, that we're not going to have much of a future. And if it's like that, and if you can get out of the situation, legally, ethically, morally, spiritually, then those options are worth exploring. I'm not saying to run away from home if you're a youth. Don't do that. But what I am saying is that, if there are options out there, and if that's the last resort, then maybe some of those options are worth exploring sometimes. I know that for some people, they were, and sometimes that's kind of how it has to be. But if we can go the route of faith, hope, and love, and endure the hardships and the struggles and the trials and everything else, and it doesn't go against our salvation, then it can only really greatly enhance our salvation. And but if it does go against our salvation, then that's what we want to avoid, and that's where we want to do whatever we can to basically ensure that we don't have those have those things going on with us, harming us. And I know that there's a lot of value in peace, and having peace in ourselves, and having peace amongst others that we live around, and that sort of thing. Now, if you've done everything you can for there to be peace, or you believe you've done everything you can for there to be peace, and there still isn't peace, and the problems just keep multiplying because of certain people, then that's where sometimes something has to be done. And I know that sometimes it's the case that people have some real bad ideas that they're trying to impose, where they're trying to impose something that is just totally false, and maybe against Scripture, and against God, and that's where it may be disrupting people's peace, and I'm not saying where there's peace there's always God, but what I am saying here is that sometimes it can be good to deal with some of those issues. Now, I know that sometimes, like, it's necessary to disrupt the peace in order to really bring the message across. Sometimes, like with John the Baptist, and you look at Christ's ministry and things of that nature when he was in his ministry here on earth. There was great peace with the followers, but there wasn't peace with the Jewish leadership at the time. And that's not to say that all the followers of Christ should have just followed the Jewish leadership to such an extent as to abandon Christ, or that Christ should have. It's also not to say that Christ should have just abandoned his ministry to conform to the Jewish leadership at the time. Those things would not have been right. And so there was not peace, but it's not that God was creating, and it's not that Christ was creating the lack of peace. It's that the Jewish leadership was, at the time, was without peace because they were rejecting Christ. That's why they didn't have peace. And so there's a difference there. And I know that when we look at this, when we look at the spread of Christianity in the New Testament, for example, and we look at St. Paul and how he had to go places, and sometimes he was stoned, and sometimes he would be brought before governing authorities, and sometimes there were issues where one time even there was an issue where the whole city was in an uproar for, I believe in Ephesus, for 2 hours. They were chanting that great is Artemis of the Ephesians. Sometimes those things happen and there's no peace. But then again, that's a rejection of the message that St. Paul came. That's why there was no peace. It's a rejection of the gospel, and that's why there was no peace. And So that's where it's different if everybody accepted the gospel and then there was an issue with peace, and that would be a lot different. Then that's where there would be, things to address, where the apostles would be able to address things and maybe work some solutions there. But needless to say, when we look at it, and we look at it from the perspective of faith, hope, and love, faith, hope, and love, in the end, we can see how they bring peace. If you're working on a goal, a God-given goal, for several decades, and you work on it faithfully, and you always hope that eventually it's going to pay off, and then at the very end there, when it does, it brings a lot of peace, but in the time that you're working through that, sometimes there can be some turmoil. Now, I say some turmoil, but maybe not as much turmoil as what there would be if you didn't work on the project to begin with. So there can be more peace, and there's peace in doing God's will. There's more peace in that than there is in not doing God's will. So, just to give an example here, some people, what they do is they find that they do a job and they do a real remedial job, and they maybe start out of high school and then they do that for decades, and they get into their middle ages, as it were, and they look back and they find that everything that they've done, worked toward and whatnot, that it's all been for nothing. And there's this midlife crisis that happens where there's no peace, and then sometimes maybe they might get into a situation where things get bad enough where maybe they realize that unless they make changes in their life immediately, that they're never going to accomplish what they find to be the will that God has in their life. And so they make drastic changes, and that is all for peace, obtaining peace. And then what happens maybe is they find that with all those changes in their life, that maybe they're able to come to the thing that they find that they were always born to do, but maybe never had the courage to do, and so they find that their whole previous life was just a whole big time of turmoil without peace, and now they have peace because they're doing God's will. They know what God's will is for their life, and they're doing it, and now they have peace. And some of these things, when we think about it here, I'm just kind of maybe this and maybe that, and maybe this and maybe that. Some of these things I can kind of see how they work out, and I'm just trying to explain how we might see various conflicts that may occur. But you know, there's a lot of faith and hope that go into those things I mentioned there. Now, the whole part about love there, I mean, you know, love being patient, kind, having no record of wrongs. You know, there's no envy in love. I mean, you know, all those things which we understand to be, you know, chief among everything else here. All those things, when we look at it, we have to take into account that there's two things going on here. There's love that comes down from God onto his people, and then there's love that people have for one another, you know, like love people have for their fellow brother. And there's a lot going on here. So one of the things I want to mention here is that when we find ourselves in the situation where we're maybe envying, you know, and where we're maybe like coveting what the neighbor has or whatever, and easily offended, and some of those other things, you know, maybe it's that there's something in us that we realize we don't have, and that something in us that we don't have, you know, that's what we're trying to look for something to fill, you know. And I know that there was one guy years ago that he used to claim that you know, people have a God-shaped hole that only God will fill, and that people try to fill that with all kinds of stuff that doesn't fit in there. You know, that they try to fill it with maybe a car, or they try to fill it with maybe nice food, or they try to fill it with you know, maybe some nice drink, and they try to fill their God-shaped hole with everything but God, you know. And so when it's like that, somebody has a goal, and their goal is working toward filling that God-shaped hole, and somebody comes along and deters them from that goal, and it's not God that is going in that God-shaped hole, then, you know, there's abrupt anger, or there's, you know, outbursts, or whatever it might be, you know, and so you get into a situation there where you know, you can see how in those situations there isn't love, you know. And I know, however, that sometimes when we work toward a goal and we're building a future, you know, it is the case it's going to take sacrifice and planning, and, you know, it's going to take appropriate measures, you know, and we're not just going to be able to do it overnight, and then when people and things come in and you know, cause everything not to work, then there's consequences, and somebody has to pay those consequences sometimes. And I know, just to give an example here, what I'm talking about is, you know, we all know that retail stores are important. You know, you can't a lot of times get the things you need unless you buy them at a retail store. And you know, you go in there and you get everything you need, and in order for that to be open and for that to be there, you have to have people guard and protect the supply chain, I guess, as it were. You have to have people guard and protect the chain of supply, the things coming in and going on the shelf. You know, that has to be that everything is working properly with that, and the customers have to be able to come in and buy what they need. And if there's problems there, then that disrupts everything, and then it there might not be peace for some people. They may suddenly be without, and they're working on goals themselves and visions, and maybe they need food, or they're building a house and they need some supplies or whatever it is. And I remember there was a policy at a particular company I worked for that if there's a power outage, that the people managing the store, they had to find where that power outage was coming from. If it was a man-made power outage, then they had to track down and see who was causing the power outage so that those people could pay for it. And because otherwise, for example, your competitor causes you a power outage and you're without power for maybe a couple days, and as a result you're out maybe $160,000 in sales for maybe a couple days or more, and you have to recoup some of those costs. And so it's important that you, if you can, sometimes it's important that you take the appropriate actions, and find the people that have caused the problems, and address it. I know that it would be sad, and it may not be right if some kid is flying their kite and it gets caught in the power lines, and the kid gets electrocuted or something, and he's got big medical bills, and then the store, which has like people that own the store, which maybe have like billions and billions of dollars, then they put this big bill in the family for a couple $100,000 for a few days of lost sales or something, or a little bit over a day of lost sales. That wouldn't be quite right. That's where if we can, we'd want to have love for our neighbor, and see the bad that's happened to the little kid, and then maybe even forgive the lost sales. So that there isn't some sort of lifetime debt or something that the family has to carry. And it also would look bad for the store, I think, if they did something like that, where they're trying to put some lifetime debt on somebody like that, and it just wouldn't be right. And so there's value in guarding and protecting those work toward the vision that God has given us for our life, and work toward whatever it is that we're doing. But at the same time, if we can be gracious, a lot of times it's really for our best to do so. And it'd be different if there was somebody going around sabotaging things, and making it so that the power was just at random times cut from certain places of business. Then that would be different. Then those people would have to pay. They should pay. And there's really maybe no grace for that. But then again, some would look at that and say, well, even with that, Christ loved us first. While we were still sinners, God loved us first, and Christ gave himself for us. So, we can see, we can see a lot of depth in this, and a lot of this comes down to how we're going to measure our dimensions of God's love. How we're going to say that we'll put up with this but not that, we'll turn the cheek here but maybe not here, that we will maybe keep records of wrongs here but not here, or that we will will basically be angered in this situation but not that. And I mean, some of this stuff, if we can avoid some of those discussions and thinking there, I mean, it's just kind of like what Christ said, by the measure that you judge, so too you shall be judged. And so, if we can have a measure that is very pro-grace, then that's what we're best to have. We really are, and that's what we want to have. But at the same time, there is a place. There is a place for drawing the line, as it were. I mean, there's a place for that, and I firmly believe that one of the best places for drawing the line there is that when we get into a situation where people are opposing the gospel, and they're not just opposing it, but they're like working against it. Just to give an example, there are certain people that promote ways of living that are very much opposed to what the Scripture teaches, and they promote such things with pride that that's how they live, and they may promote it that that's how everybody should live, and that the world should be accepting of that. Well, when you see things like that, then you just maybe feel that it gives you the right to preach a message about love, and that we should just tolerate that. And then there's a certain problem with that, because what it does if we tolerate it is it loses sight of the gospel. I mean, the gospel in itself could even become corrupted by people teaching and practicing something totally opposed to the gospel, and claiming that it is the gospel, claiming that it's somehow better than the gospel even. And when that kind of thing gets imposed over church teaching or something like that, I mean, that's where God has put in place guardians to prevent that kind of thing from happening. And I'll tell you, I mean, there's stuff that I would have never thought would be preached and done and whatnot if I had lived 100 years ago. I mean, or if I lived 50 years ago or something like that. Just to give an example here, I know when I was in elementary school, and actually I think when I was at junior high school, the gay rights movement was really starting to become a full swing sort of issue, that it was becoming very public, and it was becoming very, very dominant, and it was gaining a lot of ground. And I know that I would have never imagined such a thing if I was like 5 or 10 years younger, and I would have never imagined seeing such things in the public, and a lot of people, I think, at the time found it really hard to believe that such things were even happening. And you go back another 10 or 20 years, and I mean, it becomes harder to imagine. And some of that, what it is that it's that there's maybe some ground being lost. I mean, that people are redefining what God means, even, or they're trying to do that, and they're trying to do that for themselves, maybe, and for others, and they're doing it in light of some of these things, and that's where we have to say no. It's not what we believe. That's not what we understand about love, nor is it what Scripture teaches. It's that when people are married, it's between a man and a woman, and not between anything else, and that's what we understand. I mean, that's the meaning of the gospel. It's the meaning of Scripture. And if we just tolerate some of that stuff, I mean, there's a sense in which we can maybe tolerate it in public, but to some extent, but because we have to sometimes, maybe because it may be the law even, but when it comes to issues like gay marriage, for example, or when it comes to issues like ordination of people that are openly homosexual, that are proud of it and stuff like that, and that are maybe wanting to use the platform of their ministry to promote that kind of lifestyle, then that's where we have to say no. We don't believe in that, and we don't allow that, and that's just how it is, and so it's not that we're not loving, it's that we we have a different understanding of what love means, and than what they do, and so when we look at some of these things and we look at them in depth, I mean, there's a lot we can say here. I know that some people they look at subjects like love here, and they try to use that to justify doing every evil deed, and sort of as though it's a free pass to do all evil, but it's not. We don't use that as a means of trying to have more sin in our life. We don't do that, at least we certainly should. We should look at it and understand that love is important, and it's important to us as something that we want to have more of, and something that we want to preserve, protect, if there is such a preserving and protecting, something that we want to ensure that we can increase, and but not something that we should define away, or that we should use as a cover for sin, or something that we should use as like a marketing scheme or a ploy or something to get people to believe in something that's false, because that's not right, and I know that some people they can so to speak talk the talk, but they can't, so to speak, walk the walk, and that's what we need to look at here with love. Is it the case that when we talk love, that it's just talk and it's not walk? That we just talk and there's nothing there behind it? Or is it the case that when we talk love, that it's genuine? And I know that some of this stuff, I know when the scripture talks about faith, hope, and love, one of the things that it mentions is that when I was a child, I thought like a child, and became older, put away childish things, and there's a certain level of maturity here that's important to recognize. We treat children and new Christians differently than what we do people that have been Christians for 20, 30, 40 years maybe. So somebody that's a child that maybe they don't really know what love is all that much, we treat that differently than maybe somebody that is 70, 80 years old, and has gone to church services for all those years, and awesome too that is active and in that and stuff, and we might treat those things very differently. That there's a certain level of spiritual maturity that's expected between one and the other. And I know that age doesn't always equivocate to spiritual maturity. That's important to recognize too. We get into the situation here where it's important to look and see that as we go along in life, and as churches go along in ministry and whatnot, that maybe they had things early on that served the people at the time, but as time went on, those things kind of dropped away, and all the people were left with is love. And that is important to note. I know that when I went to college for 20 years, it wasn't necessarily love that we were studying. It was a lot of things that are very very complicated in terms of how the world works and how things work and that kind of thing. It's mathematics and whatnot, computer programming, and there's a sense in which when I became older, I mean, those things were still there, and they're still in my mind, but they kind of drop off. It's not like the focus of my life. And but what is central is like how I treat my mother who's disabled. What's central is how I treat other people that I encounter that believe and maybe have issues with homelessness or have issues with various problems in their life that are coming to me. And those people have come to me, and that's where those things are important. Those things are what matters. But the science of the math and the science of the computer programming and all those things, it is important, but unless you're going to be programming a computer or unless you're going to be like developing a missile guidance system or something like that, or putting some sort of rover on the moon or Mars or whatever, I mean, it's not something that you're going to have, that you're going to use every day in your mind and where it becomes the focus of your life. So it's not like it doesn't matter, but it just may not be the focus of your life. And but I can just about guarantee you you're going to have plenty of time in your life to practice love. Because people are born in families. Generally, they live in families and they die in families, and that's generally how things work. People see their grandparents pass on. They see their parents pass on sometimes, and sometimes they see brothers and sisters pass on. And there's a beginning and an end to pretty much all things. Except, of course, that God is the beginning and the end. He's the Alpha and the Omega, and or the Lord is the beginning and the end. And we get into the situation here where we get into the situation here where everybody's going to have a chance to practice love, pretty much, for the most part. But not everybody's going to have a chance to practice computer programming or mathematics or even music, for example. I know that when I was in junior high school, I had, actually I think it was elementary school, I think it might have been elementary school, I had an opportunity to play an instrument, and so I had that opportunity and I tried to play, and things didn't go so well, but I had the opportunity and I took it. Now, when we look at this and we think about it, and when we think about it carefully here, I mean, that is something that is unique. It's something that has a small place in a person's life, and maybe for a few years, even if it's done for a lifetime, that's still not going to be the focus of a person's life. I mean, even with the best people, the most skilled people that play a clarinet or play, an oboe or whatever it is, or a piano, they're not going to be doing that likely all day long. But they will have an opportunity to love all day long because there are likely going to be people in their lives, whether it be family, friends, whether it be coworkers or associates or whoever it is that are going to be in their life. And so really, if love is the thing that is emphasized here, like all the skills and the knowledge and everything that's considered to be most essential is the love that people are looking to build, then that becomes a lot more. It becomes a lot more key and essential for daily living, and a lot more important even than what playing the instrument would be. Now, that's not to say that people shouldn't practice playing an instrument. If your objective in life, if you find that God has revealed to you that you're going to play an instrument better than anybody else in your life, and that's what God has for you, and that's what you're working toward, then that's what you need to do. You need to play that instrument better than anybody else, and become world renowned in it, maybe even, and glorify God. But through the use of that. But the problem that you get into here is that I can almost guarantee you that if you put all the time into playing that instrument and practicing with that instrument, and you compare that to the amount of time that's available to love and to practice love, you're going to find that the opportunities for love and to practice love are so much greater in number even than what the opportunities would be to play the instrument. I mean, that's likely how it's going to go. I can't guarantee you fully that that's how it's going to go, but that tends to be how things go. And so I'm not saying that we should abandon, I'm not saying that we should abandon skills and trades and things that we need to, practice at, and things that we need to, work on and stuff and be good at. I'm not saying we should abandon that stuff. But what I am saying is that ideally, love should be first and not last. Certainly so. That's the goal here, because love is the greater and not the lesser. Love is what's important. And if we have no love, then we're just kind of, what we do is worthless anyway. And so, needless to say, when we reflect on it, when we reflect on this in a lot of depth, and we really think about it, we get into a situation where we have to ask ourselves, how do we think of love? how do we have that in our life? You know, how do we how do we administer it? You know, how do we keep ourselves from losing it? You know, how do we keep ourselves from it being corrupted? You know, how do we ensure that what we have is genuine? You know, how do we do what's right in regard to the subject? You know, there's maybe a lot of other questions that I could be asking here. Those are the questions that we should be asking. And you know, if we don't ask some of those questions, then you know, we can get into a situation where you know, maybe it's not important to us. I mean, I hate to say that. I just say maybe. I mean, maybe you don't need to ask any questions. But needless to say, that is the reflection here for today. And we have a lot of value in this subject, and so we'll maybe look at it in depth and you know, have some discussions in the future regarding it, and see how things go. Well, God be blessed, God be praised, and have a happy and safe day today, tomorrow, all of your days. God bless.